Welcome to episode 155. Half the year gone. We plod and we plod and we plod. And plodding with me today on Zoom again, sorry for the poor sound quality, is the Don joining me from West Dublin.
Yeah.
So, any news to report?
I mean, like, same shit, different day. Like this, I was going to say, Jesus, half the year gone, it's flown in, but it really fucking hasn't. I'm dying to see Reading in the Years 2020.
So for overseas listeners, Reading in the Years is a cheesy Irish television program that kind of recounts a year with the music and all the news going back. So
yeah, so they're doing, I think they initially had done it, like it started at the start of RTÉ, so like in the 60s, and they stopped in the 90s, and then like everyone kind of likes it. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure because you look through and there's some years where you were born and you're like, oh, I remember that, that's weird, and they've got all the Irish music on at the same time. It's kind of a feel good, it's a nice little look back, but they're going to need it's only 30 minutes long. They're going to need an entire fucking box set for 2020. Like, this will be one to sit down with the grandkids.
Well, yes and no, because like there hasn't been a lot of, you know, music and art and all that stuff being done, so it's kind of...
Oh, there has, but there's like the shit stuff. So I mean, for us, just kind of getting through our days, and most people, it's quite monotonous. There hasn't been a whole lot going on. The news, up until things started kicking off in America, the news all over the world was literally the same shit for day in, day out by the coronavirus. So, like, to live through it, incredibly monotonous. But at the same time, when we look back at all the stuff that has happened, like, can you imagine being a history teacher and having to teach some kid that's not born yet what happened in 2020? And I'm kind of like, I'm really waiting for like a space invasion for September. Like, what hasn't happened?
God will appear.
Oh, did you see? There's a guy, now where is he from? I think New Orleans. But he's a voodoo person, and he has been arrested because he was, I think, online. He was buying locks of Donald Trump's hair, and they've actually done it by weight. He has a certain amount of, like 8 grams of hair. Now, the Seppos they will do anything. They will measure in absolutely anything but imperial measurement, except when it's 9mm guns. But I'm not sure that they got that bit. That's the irony of it. But yeah, so he was procuring locks of Donald Trump's hair in order to...
create a voodoo doll.
Yeah. And there's like a mugshot of him, and like, so he's... But like, that's religious persecution. Kind of, bit of a stretch.
Where was he getting the hair from?
I don't know. It was the weirdest thing.
Donald Trump's tremendous hairdresser putting some in a bag after she's finished cutting his bouffant.
But like, if you worked for him, right, regardless of how you feel politically, can you imagine having to babysit that child? And every day even if you're Republican, even if you align politically, having to work for that fucking brat day in, day out. What has he fucking said now? I'm just
picturing Donald Trump's valet getting kind of nobbled to do this. And he starts tiptoeing into Donald Trump's bedroom in the middle of the night. Donald Trump is there on his back snoring, and Melania is asleep, and he has to tiptoe over with the scissors and just cut a little bit of his hair. And then just as he cuts it, Donald Trump starts, and then he steals out of the bedroom. There's a creaky floorboards just by the door. Goes... Donald Trump is 74-year-old man, 77, whatever age he is. And then he goes out and he gets a little baggie and puts the lock of hair in and sends it to the voodoo guy for like $5,000. And he gets this little sort of voodoo doll, and, you know, like those little troll things, and he just puts the blonde hair on top and then sticks pins in them. Because Donald Trump this week was found wanting coming down a ramp. Did you read that? He was on some sort of US Navy ship, and then he got all freaked out because they all said, oh, he looked a bit unsteady on his feet. I was not unsteady on my feet. It was snippy and wet, and I'm very able and capable of walking. Thank you very much. And
now stop it. Doesn't he have bone spurs?
Apparently, yeah. The last episode we did all about Donald Trump, and it's got worse. You know, we're watching CNN every fake news night, and watching CNN, it's very hard to know why it's called fake news, because it's like a camera on a street with people marching against sort of racism and Donald Trump, and that's tremendous crowds, many crowds.
Yeah, well, that being said, it's propaganda no matter what. Like the thing with the US is, like, I mean, I prefer to watch CNN than fucking Fox News, but it's just so polarized, and it's, so no, it's certainly not fake. The idea of fake news, well, like, Huns are on the street. I can see it. I'm sat here watching it on the TV. They haven't planted those, unless you're going to go full on David Icke. They're all actors. No, it's actually happening. There is the thing of propaganda if you're showing only one particular side. Now, I'm not really sure which angle people want them to show that doesn't involve protesters being shot in the face with rubber bullets. But I do get the idea of it. So I don't particularly, I'm not fighting his corner, but yeah, I do get that it can be all true, but it can be imbalanced. I'm just not really sure where you find the balance in this shit.
We had no deaths in Ireland today for only the second time, and only 18 new cases. So it seems to be in abatation, if that is such a word. Although they are forecasting a new hammer, but shops are all opened. Your favourite shop?
Penny's, hon. I still haven't been there. I'm looking forward to it.
So Penny's is like the Irish national treasure when it comes to shopping for clothes, etc. And they opened on Monday last, and there was a huge queue outside the... It
was Friday. So
Friday,
Penny's, essentially, people think that religion has gone out of Ireland, and it's not. It's just that our temple is Penny's. You have assimilated, and you're going to fit in here if you've learned that as soon as someone compliments something you're wearing, thanks on Pennies, and you say it was €5, it was €10, whatever it was, and other people don't get this because they go, oh, why are you running it down? It's lovely. You shouldn't make little of it. And we're like, oh, no, we're proud. It is an institution. It is the reason that we don't have as much far-right populism going on in this country, because everybody just goes into Pennies, gets himself a new thing of jammies. You get new PJs, you get yourself bits and bobs, cheap makeup, a few jellies. You go home, you light your new candle, and you just calm the fuck down. And I think it's really affected how people, I mean, I know lockdown in general has been difficult, but like I see people online and the level of their bullshit has really gone up, and I kind of think that one needs a good ride, and she also needs a shopping trip to Pennies, and she will calm down. So I do worry. I worry about injuries that people will sustain from the initial going in. So I've had to avoid it. I desperately need to go to Pennies because the children very rudely grew over lockdown. So I've like loads of shit I need to get. Una and Anya. Fucking Thumbelina and her brother just suddenly decided to take a growth spurt when all the shops are closed. So I'm dying to go into Pennies now. So
the Don's daughter, Anya, in real life, she launched her own podcast. She's a 9-year-old, and she just got a commendation from the Irish Philosophical Society or something, right? Yeah. It
was a Young Philosopher Award competition. She was way too young to enter it, but she's entered stuff in anyway. So they want to put one of her episodes on optimistic nihilism and Nietzsche in the lockdown. They want to put that episode on their UCD website and their Philosophy of Ireland website. I don't know.
You can hear her podcast on, it's called Peanut from the Gallery, and it's on Facebook. So yeah, we're a bit flat this week. Not a lot. I mean,
I'm surprised it's taken you this long, but like what's happened this week is that in some sort of weird flex, the right got Harry Potter.
Oh yeah.
So J.K. Rowling, the writer, the author of Harry Potter, it's about this special breed of human that is magical and special and genetically is gifted, and they go to this really posh boarding school, and then they all end up being civil servants for the rest of their life at the end. Now, there's a real problem in that there are no people of colour in her books. There are things like her goblins that so like, long story short, right, she's a bit of a cunt. Like, she's not a nice girl, but she's also a very well-known TERF. So aside from her weird anti-Semitism hints that go through the books, there's all of that kind of shit, but she's also been known for coming out with some TERFy stuff, TERF being trans exclusionary radical feminist. So she's on that bandwagon of being concerned for cis women or women, saying some unsavoury things. Now, I will also point out she has another set of books that not everybody knows about. They're crime books that she's written, also meant to be shite, but she writes them under a pseudonym. She has this bullshit story of it's made up from two names that I liked as a child. She has named her pseudonym for her crime books are named after a doctor. Robert Galbraith is the pseudonym that she uses instead of her own name. A very famous doctor in America who tortured gay people with electroconvulsive therapy to cure them. Now, the fact that she also happens to make it her fucking business to get involved in all the trans, anti-trans, whatever. I mean, she clearly has a bee in her bonnet about it, but she just also happened to stumble across this pseudonym that shares the name of this very famous doctor. So, like, whilst I think the conversation has become extremely polarised and I have an issue with the thought policing, I also think, look, she's setting out to be a bitch. She's asking for it, so my sympathy is limited.
Yeah, I read her. I read this sort of essay that she wrote, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, fair enough." I'm kind of just in this mode right now where I'm just backing away from it all. I've brought it up many times on podcasts before, and
people don't want to touch it.
My main worry has always been the comedy side of things, where we're moving towards a society where you're just not allowed to say anything that might offend anybody, and if you do step above the parapet, you're head gets blown off it by social media bombardments to the point where I think people are just nervous. I mean, we just listened to Sam Harris's new show today, which he just, in typical Sam Harris style, just grabs the nettle and, I don't agree with everything Sam Harris says, but he's a brave bastard, some of the things he's saying. And he does make the point that we only get through this with conversation and allowing people to have different points of view. And the far left are causing, just as much trouble as the white supremacists on the far right. And, also possibly opening a path up for Trump to be re-elected. Absolutely.
So, I mean, aside from anything else, even aside from the fact that it irritates me, even just from the point of view of, if you want the world to be a better place, and if your views are somewhat progressive and you want equality and all of that kind of stuff, the best way you can avoid that happening is by going regressive left, going full tilt, squealing, how dare you, I'm triggered, you hurt my feelings. Anybody, if you're not entirely with us, if you have any questions whatsoever, then you're not with us, then you're against us, then you're a Nazi, then you're a bad person. Now, even if you think that that's morally correct, the problem is, in any group of people, in any country, you've got a certain segment of people that are knuckle-dragging, racist, homophobes, and they're quite happy with that. You told them that, they'll say, fine, yes, that's what we want. And then you'll have certain people who are extremely progressive and left-wing, and they're really pro-gay rights and all that kind of jazz, and anti-racism. You're not going to change either the mindset of either set of people, but you can actually alienate and ostracize anybody in the middle, or anyone that's somewhat progressive, but maybe not progressive enough for your taste. Now, it's okay to disagree with them and be bothered by some of their views, but when we get to the point of it being as vitriolic as it is now, that people are afraid to speak, what you're actually doing is the whole cohort of people that wouldn't like to be labelled as racist or turfy, so they want to be progressive, and you're literally just saying, if you're not all the way there with me, if you aren't 100% in my camp, then you're a Nazi. So eventually people either won't talk about it at all, or will quietly go, oh, for fuck's sake, it's gone too far now. So congratulations.
We're going down a road of identity politics on speed, and it is not going to end well, because it's got a massive division. As Martin Luther King Jr. and people said, the vision is for a day where colour of skin doesn't matter, and that we're a long way away from. We're a long way away from that. But you can't say that now, exactly. And I think despair, to be honest.
Intent is important. So, I sound facetious when I say you can't say that now. I'm sitting here, we're two white people, so I don't want to, speak over. If black people are saying, look, this is not a helpful conversation, I'd kind of go, well, maybe shut the fuck up and listen, because, I might have a bit of learning to do. When it comes to race issues, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to all of these social issues, even the kind of what we just said, oh, you can't say that now. And I know that All Lives Matter is generally a facetious thing that was designed to discredit the Black Lives Matter movement. I get that. But I also get that on the internet now, 90% of people that are putting up All Lives Matter are too thick to know better. They're not actually being racist. So if you continue to hammer at people rather than to open a discussion, then you're kind of not turning them off. You're turning them off doing the right thing. Now, I know why All Lives Matter is hurtful. I don't like All Lives Matter. I would say to a friend, yeah, come here, just so you know, you look like a right-wing cock. You look like one of these fucking racist alt-right pricks. So I know you don't mean that, but just FYI, that particular phrase has been co-opted. It's up to yourself. When people are well-intended and are trying to make a progressive point, if you fucking scream every time they get something wrong, you're literally just shaming people out of the arena, and then they're going to go into the other one, and then you whinge that the world isn't a nicer place.
Yeah, no, I lived in America from I basically was there for the entire Obama presidency. And like the racism was just everywhere. And I lived in Boston. I went to Georgia, an awful lot of Georgia, full of race, a lot of them Irish Americans.
Oh God, the worst kind.
Dallas, I lived in Texas, very racist-y. Then you start going, well, how do we fix it? And there's all these people in America who are kind of middle class, who just are terrified of speaking truth to power. So they don't engage with the whole Donald Trump bullshit. They're just kind of hoping, I think, that he doesn't get elected. There's no activism at this certain level. And so what we're seeing, I think, now in America is a perfect storm where so many people were out of work, so many young people were out of work, that they took to the streets every night for 16 nights. Barmen, wait staff, stewards, people who worked in office buildings, they were all available to march. Now, of course, we can talk about the marching and the COVID, which is running rampant throughout America at the moment still, even though they're all pretending it's gone away. And that's been good. I mean, I'm finally seeing an aggravation that I'm hoping will spill over into Trump not getting elected again. The best thing I think that can happen for race relations in America is Joe Biden gets elected president, you know?
Yeah, like of all the shit that he has pulled, and if this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, that's actually quite a nice thing for the entire country.
Well, he's saying the economy is going to be coming back, and I can't see that because America's like the Titanic, and it's hit an iceberg and it's pretending everything's fine, and I just think it's going to get worse. And I'm not saying Joe Biden's great, but as I said before in a podcast, put a monkey in a suit and stick a Democratic badge in him, vote for the monkey. You know, I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter how thick, sleepy, or senile Joe Biden is. He's better than Donald Trump for the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll keep it short and sweet this week. Those of you who are regular listeners know that the Don is here today to continue her top 20 countdown. And this week she is entering the top 10. And as ever, the Don asks me 3 questions to see if I can guess or remember the guest with whom I spoke. So, clue 1.
Well, this is segued quite nicely in. So, 1, we're living through capitalism with the handbrake off.
Next.
In the early days of Trump, I was expecting the worst. I don't know if he's gotten saner or I've got used to him or a combination of the two, but I'm a little bit more relaxed.
No.
And finally, you asked, are you positive about the future? The answer was, some days yes, some days no.
Is it a man?
It is.
Is he English?
Yes.
Is he Giles?
Nope.
Well, then I have been beaten. Who is it?
It is Richard Watson, the Futurist, who you spoke to 2 years ago, and we've just been talking about this now, so I thought it'd be really interesting to have a look back on the Futurist and the things that he had predicted. And
Richard Watson's a great guy. I met him probably in the late 90s, early 2000s in Sydney. He is a futurist, so he basically he writes books and he does newsletters and he goes around speaking at conferences about what the future will bring. And he's great raconteur, and we always enjoy sitting down and having a bottle of wine. We did this in a cheese shop, which was very Monty Pythonish. So there's a little bit of background cheese shop ambience. Have you got any cheese at all? What did you like about the interview?
I thought it was one of the really cool and interesting ones anyway. I remember you showed me that map thing he's talking about.
Yeah.
Mind-blowing. Fucking mind-blowing.
I'll put a link to that on the blurb.
Yeah, you should. It's brilliant. Today, I'm a bit bored, fed up. It kind of feels like the world is starting back up again. We've lived through this really strange time. So I was like, I really want to go back and hear what he had to say. And then you pick out the little nuggets like that are... I
remember one of the things he said was he decided to stop reading newspapers every day and just read them at the end of the week and throw most of them away because the news is moving so fast that, there's...
Yeah, like if it's important, it'll get to you. So there is that thing. And I'd be so interested, like when I'm hearing that conversation now, of course I know what I know and he doesn't 2 years ago know what's going to happen, but it's still a really interesting conversation. And I so want to hear the next 10 minutes of the conversation now with hindsight, because lots of the stuff he's talking about, the not reading the news, a lot of this stuff, it has become the norm of how people discuss and work out life at the moment. There are weird new normal. I'd love to know what Richard 2 years ago.
See if I can contact him and see if he can come on the show. I mean, I'd love to hear his perspective on all this this mess the world is in right now. Okay, this is number 10 in the Don's Top 20 Countdown. The venerable, intelligent, smart, witty Richard Watson.
Welcome to another Pint with Seaniebee. This is another first. We're in a cheese shop in London, and it's very smelly of cheese, but it is quiet. And I'm here with a very old friend of mine from... He's not old, but we know each other for a long time. He is a futurist, first futurist on the show. Richard Watson, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We've been trying to do this for about 2 years.
We have indeed. Various places.
So anyway, what's the future hold?
I don't really care anymore. I'm a bit over it, to be honest.
Richard's been running a couple of brands called Now and Next, Brain Mail, and...
there was Brain Fruit a very long time ago.
Yeah.
No,
I was with you when you were launching that.
Past.
We were working together on that. And what he does is, on one level, he gathers all the latest new thinking and ideas from around the world and pockets it and packages it in a friendly, bite-sized email/website. He also does speeches and talks around the world about what the future is going to bring from industry to society to culture, and he's an all-round bright egg. So, seriously, what's the future hold?
I really don't care. I'm trying to disengage from it, to be
Are you
perfectly honest.
positive about the future? It's something I ask quite a few of my...
you know, I mean, some days yes, some days no. I mean, I'm generally pretty positive at the moment. I had a phase where I was just very pessimistic. It was that sort of early days of Trump, and I was expecting the worst.
You and most of the world.
And he seems to have, I don't know whether he's sort of got a little saner or I've just got used to him, or combination of the two, but I'm a little bit more relaxed. I've also sort of taken a
give people who are still petrified about the whole Trump thing some reason to be more relaxed.
Well, what sort of cheered me up a bit, this is a slightly weird one, what cheered me up a bit was, it's not the end of the world, and if it is, there's nothing you or I can do about it, so you might as well relax. And the problem with sort of constantly having your head in the future and trying to cover every single thing on multiple scenario levels is it does slightly do your head in. I mean, I started trying to write a book about thinking, and it occurred to me that perhaps the end chapter should be something around, can you think too much? And I think actually you can at some point. I think you can go slightly crazy. The other problem is, historically what I've done is read a lot and try and sort of digest it and cross-fertilize it, and there's just too much stuff to read now. There's just too much information, and I've started quite seriously disengaging. I mean, one trick I've started to do, which works quite well, is I've started to read newspapers backwards, in the sense that
sports page first.
No, not that. I will buy, I mean, first of all, the dailies I've given up with, they're just full of nothing. Weekend editions of major newspapers are quite analytical, and that's good. People have the time. But I like reading them a month past their read-by date. And you can skim it real fast when the news is old news, and you can just put it together. It's quite Zen-like. You can put things together in a much sort of calmer way, and that seems to work. But I also find that if something really important happens, the news tends to find me, or somebody will say, have you seen this, have you seen that, or I'll just bump into information. And I swear to God, 95% of what's on television, what's in the news, what's on the radio is of no consequence. So I've just taken the view to just get the hell out of there to some extent. I mean, I've switched slightly to sort of away from newspapers to periodicals on paper. I find reading things on paper makes me calmer. Books up to a point if you can find the time. Magazines. So my reading list has shrunk fantastically over about the last sort of 6-9 months.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm finding it really hard to read books. I don't know why, because I've got lots more time in my hands. The idea that we would give up following the news, some people swear by this. In fact, a lot of people who, since Trump, have actually employed this. They don't read the news or follow it as little of it as they can, on probably the basis of what you just said. That everything is kind of binary, and the idea that we're all going to hell in a handbasket.
No, I disagree with that. It's not binary at all. That's the sort of classic mistake, I think. You know, we think that every car is going to be self-driving, and actually I don't think that's going to happen. We're going to get these sort of blurry, sort of grey areas where there's a bit of this and a bit of that. You know, the new technology takes off, but the old stuff refuses to go away. You know, look at music, look at books. You know, you've got both side by side to some extent when people were predicting the extinction of one because of the other. I mean, the other problem with the future at the moment is first of all, the future is literally now. You know, I'll dream something up, and, you know, within a second I'll go online and find out that that's already happened. You know, I've written books where you come up with some fairly extreme ideas about something, and then the whole world starts talking about it before you've even finished the book, so you have to take it out of the book. the terrorists hijacking self-driving vehicles was the example there. But I then moved on to people bringing down aeroplanes with smartphones, and then that started getting talked about way before me finishing the book. And, you know, I have a good friend who writes real books, Lavi Tidar. He writes science fiction books, and we had a kind of interesting conversation once about, you know, what does the word future mean? And he writes several hundred years into the future, bear in mind. I'm just concerned with 20 or 30.
H.G. Wells of his time.
He's a bit like that. And he was saying, well, the future is when things start to get really weird. And I sort of struggled to work out how they could be weirder than they already are. I mean, you know, one of the things about writing books about the future or talking about it is you need to be fairly provocative. You've got to come up with some ideas that most people disagree with or have never thought of, and that's becoming increasingly difficult these days. I mean, you know, Trump is the president of the United States. It's a bit like living in an episode of South Park. Yeah. So it's incredibly hard to come up with provocative thinking when there's all this provocation around us every day.
We're also, over the last couple of months, getting murmurs about the fact that he's going to get 4 more years. What's your prediction on that?
I think it's distinctly possible. I mean, I did a trend map once of a couple of years ago, and at the bottom was a bunch of global risks, and it took about 2 years to do this map, and at one point one of the global risks was decline of human intelligence, and underneath was Trump really is president, and before I finished the map he was, so I had to take that off. And actually Trump's getting a second term is distinctly possible. At the time I was thinking, you know, maybe he's not that bad. You know, we were all sort of apoplectic, if that's the right word, about a glass of rosé, about Reagan not so long ago. So, you know, maybe he turns out okay. That's a surprise scenario. You never know. I think it's unlikely, but I think he's a complete lunatic. But I think it is. In fact, it might be even better than Evans that he gets a second term. That is a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I think the things that are being mooted is, first of all, there's no obvious person emerging to take him on, and that person should be coming out of the woodwork around about now, which is, you know, close to 2 years coming up.
I mean, there is no alternative, in the words of Margaret Thatcher. He is the personification of a need, and you can take Trump away, and then something else will pop up. And it's similar to some extent to Brexit. I mean, this is an aging demographic that feels increasingly disenfranchised and uncomfortable, and it's their sort of reaction to it. So, yeah, you take him away, you get another version of him to some extent.
Also, the fact that the jobs are falling, which people did not predict unemployment would fall as quickly as it has in the US. People's pensions and shares, because let's face it, at the end of the day, America is a greedy country, are being looked after. And my worry is that the wider thing is just the whole spread of selfishness and the difficulty of looking after fellow man, and the difficulty of sort of the you're fired element that he brings to the party, the identity politics, the bubbling over of racism again in a way that was always there but is being fomented.
I mean, it's a very extreme form of capitalism that he represents, and to some extent what we're living through at the moment is capitalism with the handbrake off. You know, there used to be a stabilizing force in the sense of it was sort of the West versus the East, it was the US versus Russia, and that's kind of collapsed now, and it's a complete free-for-all. I'd say you can do anything as long as it's not illegal, but actually you can even do stuff that's illegal too. Yeah. So, and I think that is creating a deep level of anxiety. It's like the bad guys are winning. There's also too much change going on for most people's liking, which makes people quite sort of nervous and flighty. And you've nailed it. I mean, first of all, I think we need it sounds a bit sort of grandiose to say it, but we need a strategy for the human race this century in the light of things like AI. And the other thing I think we need is we need to move away from me back to we to some extent. I mean, that smacks of collectivism, which is a bad thing to some extent, but it is...
This idea that we all, if we don't do capitalism, well, all we're left with is Marxism, and that killed billions, which is true, but we don't look at the social democratic countries of Scandinavia, where they seem to be doing it a lot better than
it's completely self-absorbed. I mean, there's something in the papers, obviously not that I read them, a couple of days ago about, actually it might even be this morning, I heard about it somewhere, there was a study that the loneliness at work, and you know, people are they're in there with their headphones on, they don't talk to people, they just email them even if they're 6 feet away. And that's all terribly efficient and convenient on one level, but if you spin that forward, 30, 40 years, I think you have, the narcissism, the self-interest, the personalization turns into potentially, well, it's extreme loneliness on quite a lot of levels. There are a lot of people that say, we don't need other people. You can be a perfectly well-functioning human being dealing with everything virtually. You're at home, you never leave it. You work from home, everything you need is delivered from home. You socialize virtually. And it's to some extent a generational thing. But I think personally that's wrong. I think at some level you would go completely mad if that's taken to an extreme.
You do these brilliant, you just referenced them, the future maps, which look like a kind of a tube. You've clearly got inspiration from the London tube map, but they're absolutely fantastic. I'll put a link to one in the blurb of the podcast where you can just basically pick a theme and follow Richard's predictions into the future, which are rabbit holes that you can just go down, and they're fantastic. Elucidate your views on the future of technology. You mentioned AI and stuff like that. People are terrified of the singularity and the robotic overlord.
Well, I'm pretty relaxed about that stuff. I've always thought that's a bit unlikely. I went to a really brilliant conference recently on AI and sci-fi with a bunch of really serious academics, and I mean the robot thing is nonsense. We can completely disconnect and relax about that threat. It is not coming. There are some very clever robots designed to do very specific things, but this sort of idea of the sort of general marauding, transformery, Independence Day typey, dystopia, I just don't think it's coming.
On the basis that we can always just switch them off?
On the basis that it's very difficult to create we've not really progressed in 100 years on robots that can walk around and be generally useful. What we've got really good at is creating robots that can do one thing unbelievably well.
Yeah.
Now, the only exception to that, as far as I can see, is autonomous weapons that just do their own thing. They are a real threat. But I don't think the threat is robotic. I mean, there is a threat from robotics, but the bigger threat is sort of unseen automation. It's algorithms that are sort of taking the humanity out of the human race. That's the real threat. In terms of general AI, similar. I mean, I don't foresee general artificial intelligence emerging anytime soon, although there are plenty of people saying it's imminent. I think very smart and narrow AI, absolutely. It's been with us for a while, actually. And even if we do get AGI, artificial general intelligence, the idea that it suddenly wakes up and becomes conscious is ludicrous to my mind. It's just... we can barely describe what human consciousness is, let alone replicate it. So that's not something I'm worrying about. It really isn't.
The other side of that coin, though, argue that it might not be human consciousness, but it might be, I read somewhere that if you had the most powerful computer in the world and you were asking it to replicate a tomato, right? So you put a tomato in front of it, and it basically had to replicate that either by whatever screen printing or whatever. That it would possibly blow up the world, because it would look at every possibility to make a tomato, and one of those possibilities would be blowing up the world. Oh, that didn't work. And so that we have these robots that are designed to solve problems, but they also they can't work out the fact that blowing up the world is not an option. Please, thank you.
You've got to be very careful what you specify with artificial intelligence. I mean, there's a thing called the paperclip something. If you ask a machine, a really intelligent machine, to maximize the production of paperclips, same end result. It destroys the world because it'll do anything to maximize the production of paperclips. Yeah. So but
it just needs one prick to get that wrong.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it's optimism versus pessimism. Short term, I think I'm a little bit pessimistic. There's a lot of things can and will go wrong, but longer term, I think we're sort of vaguely smart enough to sort of sort the problem out and see various things coming.
New bases of normality, though, creeping stuff like climate, where we kind of know there's a problem and we do fuck all about it. For interesting watching Al Gore's new movie, he's like slapping his head going, well, maybe we could, but even things are starting to happen there. The cost of the solar cell has come down, and companies can start seeing that they can make money from environmentally healthy, especially places like Texas.
I mean, first of all, we seem to be. I mean, we keep inventing new fears. We keep inventing new anxieties. I don't entirely know why. There's probably some sort of deeper thing going on there. I mean, what people forget is the future is not a linear extrapolation from present conditions. That's the classic mistake people make. It's a system. It has feedback loops in it. I mean, we were hysterical about peak oil 10 years ago. And what people failed to see was, how much oil is left depends on how much we're willing to pay for it. The more expensive it is, the more incentive there is to go and find more of it. And the history of the oil industry to some extent is technological innovation. There's an assumption in there, and all predictions contain assumptions that we'll need oil in the future. Maybe we won't. And then there's a sort of feedback loop in play. If oil gets really expensive or undesirable, there is a huge economic, societal incentive to go and find something else. And energy is one thing I'm just really not concerned about. We are bathed in energy every day. We have a short-term storage problem with energy. I mean, I'm far more concerned about food and water, and particularly water going forward. And water, you've either got it or you haven't. It's quite difficult to sort of substitute an alternative.
There is only a certain amount of water on the planet.
Yeah, but even there, it's just, it's like paper bags. We started charging 5p per paper bag, all of a sudden our behaviour... plastic bag, our behaviour changes. You could change the water problem with pricing, with societal shifts in terms of attitudes, behaviour. regulation, and we're wasteful. 70% I think of global water use gets sprayed on fields willy-nilly. Why don't we try precision agriculture as an idea where we start watering individual plants, not entire fields. We start getting clever with how we use it. So I'm ultimately quite relaxed about that as well.
Things that Trump is making America great again, and you hear a lot, is the march of technology is out of control, and people yearning for the good old days. Were there ever any good old days?
I don't think there ever were. The interesting thing about Make America Great Again is it's backward looking. It's again is the key word there. And I think there is a bit of a battle going on now between going backwards and going forwards. Silicon Valley is all for going forwards, and you've got other sort of demographics, other regions that want to go backwards. Because, it's your point, were there ever? It's perceived safety in the past. There's two massive things going on potentially at the moment. One is climate change, the other is aging populations. And aging populations have a tendency to retreat into history. Nostalgia is a very potent force for people over 65. So that comes into play as well. And again, we're being very singular in terms of looking at technology and extrapolating forward. You've got to overlay things like demographics over technology. And there's all sorts of scenarios in terms of where things could play out. The other thing that I find quite amusing about the likes of AI and robotics is people seem to talk about it as though it's some sort of independent force. We are the ones inventing and deploying this stuff. If it's making us feel uncomfortable, then we should do something about it. The future is something that's created from what you and I decide to do today and tomorrow. It's not. Some of it.
Except
we have
for
no
Scaramanga or Ozymandias in his cave up in Greenland, who's got munchkins working on
bits of it are
rogue.
Bits of it are out of control, but we are hugely powerful, both individually and especially collectively. And if we don't like the direction of things, then it's incumbent upon us to change them.
What would be the three? You may have already mentioned them, and you have to skirt back over them. The three things that you do feel we're not paying attention to that we really should be.
Are you referring to just trends or horsemen of the apocalypse?
No, you as a person. What you studied all this stuff, and you go, oh shit.
Okay, I
can be flippant if you want, but
I think the biggest problem this century is loneliness.
Right.
Which I've been talking about for a while. It's sort of slightly coming onto the agenda now. On the one hand, we're connected like never before, but it's superficial, and we're living alone. We don't need other people like we used to, and I think people at some sort of deep level are feeling, ultimately quite lonely. I think another issue that is getting some airplay, but not enough, is sleep. Big issue, not just for physical health but mental health. I'm particularly interested in sleep because it's so necessary for the generation of ideas. When we're asleep, we make sense of the day's data. We start cross-fertilizing today's data and generating insights and ideas. The third thing I'm very concerned about at the moment is income, wealth, opportunity polarization. The world is becoming a less fair place. We have been here before. It's possibly, arguably not as bad as it has been in the past, but it's still pretty bad. And I'm not sure that's sustainable. I think at some point society snaps if you have that level of inequality.
It snaps with pitchforks and
I don't know, maybe. And then other stuff, I've been talking about, I've sort of given up talking about screens and the internet and social media as sort of addictive and disruptive forces in a negative sense, because everyone now is starting to talk about that. Although you kind of wonder where everyone was 10 years ago. I read a book 10 years ago about the serious negative downsides of social media in particular, but just screens in general and smartphones with their hugely addictive nature, and then all of a sudden everyone seems to have woken up to this, and it's amazing how it's a bit like inventing things. Your timing can stink. If you're too soon with saying something, nobody will give you any attention. Even if you got your timing right and you're saying something that is blatantly, obviously true, it's quite possible that nobody will listen because you're not wearing the right kind of suit, you haven't been to the right kind of institution, you're not the right age. If some guy, sitting outside the tube on his uppers is holding a big sign saying that the end of the world is nigh, we no attention whatsoever. But if George Soros says it, we all start paying attention. There's an article on, going back to AI, Frey and Osborne out of Oxford University, about the effects of AI on unemployment. And there were some statistics which, from memory, 47% of US jobs were under threat of automation over the next 20 years. In the UK, they were wildly optimistic, saying it was only 36%. And everyone sort of believed that because it says Oxford. And actually, if you dig into that study, it's monstrously naive. It's stupid on so many levels. It's very binary. Either a job survives or it won't. And there are some things that, like, well, according to them, there are no watchmakers or watch repairers in the future. And you kind of think, well, why? And I actually did ask them, and they didn't respond. Why would you say that? Are you assuming everyone's got a clock on their phone? That shows no understanding of psychology and why people wear watches, which has got nothing to do with telling the time. And I think they've got surgeons as being sort of job safe, when actually they are potentially under threat, according to some people I know and stuff I've seen. So it's all, it's completely autonomous or semi-autonomous.
When have
surgeons.
we ever, as a species, this may be a question that you can just blow me out of the water, because I just can't think of many off the top of my head, where we as a human species on this planet have identified a problem that is a big threat to us. And aside from things like vaccinations and stuff like that, vaccination process, which I accept are huge, but we've had one of the continents of our planet underwater, well, literally not underwater, under sun, underwater in terms of food, in terms of poverty, in terms of disease, for all of my life. And yes, we have reduced the numbers, and yes, well done. Now maybe instead of 4 billion people living under $2 a day, they're living on $2.90 or whatever. But when have we ever really galvanized? We got a man on the moon.
Oh, I think the obvious thing is nuclear weapons, right, where until very recently we had that completely under control. It's something we invented and decided that we wouldn't use them. Chemical and biological weapons, until very, very recently, and we're talking years, not even decades, were completely under control. I think we are beginning to galvanise around the issue of antibiotic resistance, which is another of those big sort of threats. And I thought you were going to say, when were we ever optimistic? And my answer was going to be in the 60s. And the 60s, technology was universally seen as a force for good, which maybe some people still see it like that. And you had Star Trek as this sort of optimistic science fiction, and now all science fiction seems to be dystopic.
Race and civil rights were all over the shop. And
that is true.
America was burning in the 60s.
The funny thing is, though, if you look at, I think, was it Obama said, when there's never been a better time to be alive. Yeah. You look at all of the metrics that really matter. You look at human lifespans. You look at women in education and work. You look at infant mortality, extreme poverty, death from serious crime and war, access to clean water, you name it. There's no question now is the golden age.
Steven Pinker's theory.
What do you want? 2018 or 1918?
Yeah.
No contest. Spanish flu raging post World War I. Yeah. But somehow we don't see that. Everyone is very anxious. They're worried about this, that, and the other. I'm not sure, but I think it comes down to two things. First of all, we're exposed to too much information. A lot of it highly dubious. So we're being put on the back foot the whole time. Go back 100 years, very little information reached our conscious minds. And when it did, it had probably been discussed quite a bit. These days, it's just like, there's no filter, it just hits us 24/7. The other issue, I think, is the perception of too much change going on. And this is an old idea from a book called Future Shock from early 70s by Alvin and Heidi Toffler. The central thesis was the perception of too much change over too short a period of time would create some sort of mental instability at an individual and institutional level. And I think that's what we're living through right now. And we are grappling to find ways of controlling the information flow and controlling the perception that there's too much going on. If you talk to a lot of business people right now, there's very senior business people, their issue seems to be, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to pay attention to. There's all this stuff going on that people tell me is going to be disruptive. What do I focus on? And to some extent, I think the answer is what you've always focused on. I mean, I was in Australia recently talking to a bank about platform banking and AI, and my wife has a bank account with them, and I know full well that they can't even spell her name right, answer their phone, stop blocking her credit card, or the worst one is they send her other people's bank statements.
Lovely.
Now, forget about AI in banking. Just fix the real simple things. And also the other thing that's not changing, which we forget, is us. Basic human needs have not changed since we crawled out of a cave. And we're not properly addressing that stuff. So, the other stuff's icing on the cake. And once you've got the basics right, you can start fiddling around with that. But most people haven't even got the basics.
What about from a more light-hearted approach? Quite a lot of your work that you send out, you also balance it with some funny or interesting, ironic visions of the future. What are some of the sort of...
I think the first thing is you can't take this stuff too seriously, because anyone, well, no, really, you shouldn't, really. Yeah. Anyone that takes this whole thing seriously is delusional. And anyone that stands up and says that something will or won't happen is kidding themselves, you or the pair of you. We fundamentally don't know what's going to happen. So a sort of degree of tongue-in-cheekness is definitely required. And I think also, if it's sort of a bit grim out there, a bit of humour doesn't hurt. And actually, humour is a incredibly human trait. And you can get machines to invent and tell jokes, but they're not fundamentally not very funny. So humour's always good, and I quite like. I'm a real fan of Black Mirror, and that's where you take now and just spin it very, very slightly and put a sort of black edge on it. I think putting a sort of humorous edge on it just sort of lightens it a little bit. And I don't know. I think it probably comes back to the fact you just can't take it too seriously. I mean, all these sort of maps I do, there's always a joke somewhere. Just to keep people on their toes. Quite often people don't see them and take things way too seriously. So I think, and also I don't know about the future, but certainly if you start looking at creativity and innovation, having a bit of a laugh, having fun is integral to the entire process. So maybe that's true with the future as well.
One of my friends said recently, why are we not laughing so much?
There's no joy at work. I mean, I can tell you about work without naming any names. But when you and I we used to work in moderately large places, there was a bit of tomfoolery, a bit of banter. Occasionally it went a little bit too far, but it was well-intentioned, well-natured, and to some extent joyous. And now, you can't say anything, you can't touch anyone on the knee, you can't call anyone a twat, you can't do the practical jokes. And there was a thing somewhere I worked recently where, actually I probably shouldn't say this, but I've started now, haven't I? Where we need more fun in the workplace. And I was
it's the worst thing.
I was suggesting ways to inject fun, and one of the ways of injecting fun was to have a drinks. And the first thing that happens, I'm assuming somebody did a sort of risk assessment on the drinks somewhere along the line that I wasn't aware of. But the second thing that happened was they wanted an outcome. And it was like, well, the outcome is we have a drink, we have a laugh. And people were seriously suggesting that there's almost somebody with a clipboard walking around writing down what they're saying for the output. So it's a bit like having a dinner party with some great mates where somebody's transcribing it. It's like, Jesus. Two
of the worrying things are this breakdown of there's obviously a very serious side to tranny toilets and identity politics and personal pronouns and Me Too. I'm not belittling it, but there needs to still be the court jester poking fun at this.
There is nothing. What's that formula? Tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Yeah.
And to my mind, there is nothing you can't make a joke about, as long as you maybe leave it a little while. I mean, I still think probably the Holocaust is going a little bit too far, especially if you're not Jewish. But tranny toilets are definitely worth a joke. And the problem we have at the moment, I was talking to somebody recently about sort of big things that nobody's talking about. We've got this sort of extreme liberalism. This is back to the sort of narcissism, I can do whatever I like thing, which is hitting up against this sort of rather sort of new puritanical streak, Calvinist thing that's going on. So you've got people, even within the Labour Party in Britain, that are saying, everything's allowed, or something is completely out of order, and then doing the exact opposite themselves. And to some extent, this will get us in trouble, to some extent you see that with the Me Too movement. There's on one level, it's a good thing on one level, but on the other level it's sort of completely contradictory and hypocritical with some of the stuff that's going on. Everyone thinks we're seriously free here. You cannot sit down in London on Waterloo Bridge and start selling socks. There is no freedom there. There's freedom to do other things. But it's hitting against some other stuff. So it's probably, to some extent, the least free we've ever been.
Well, I think the people who I know who are, let's just say the most, I don't know what the word to use is, the most liberal feminists maybe, not the Nazi feminists, but the people who are just going, there is an issue with women, 10 in 1,000 rape cases getting convictions.
No, there's some serious issues
with sexual harassment in the workplace. There is an issue with glass ceilings for women. There is an issue with women in Ireland, my country, being treated like incubators.
It's quite classist in a sense. You can stand up on the red carpet at Hollywood with a big banner saying "Me Too" with your nipples hanging out your dress, and that's perfectly acceptable because that's me being me, and that's empowerment. Yet if you're sort of walking around a Formula One grid in your bikini with a bit of cleavage showing, that's demeaning to women. It's like, well, hang on a minute. I'm not quite sure I understand that. We probably shouldn't go there. We'll get lynched. But
the other point about it is that point about all getting lynched. It's also stifling conversation. People are afraid to have the conversation.
Oh, it's the no platform thing at universities.
I don't give a fuck about having the conversation. I'm not like, in any way a misogynist.
Yeah.
But listen to him saying, yeah, I'm not. And it's like, well, only a true misogynist.
That's a real
and you get into a web.
problem.
And I'm like going, no, we need to sit down. We need to have discussions about Islam. Oh no, Islam's a very peaceful religion. Yeah, okay, but some of it is actually causing major problems.
The no platform thing at universities is deeply troubling. There seems to be things now that you're just not allowed to say.
Yeah.
Or not even believe in the privacy of your own home.
Identity, like personal pronouns, now 34 and counting, including elf, by the way. I identify as an elf.
Weird.
And if you don't call me elf, then I am offended. You can be in Canada, put in...
that probably is the future. Crime. Everyone thinks it's quite binary. It's not this, it's that. And actually, things like films like Robot and Frank and Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner to some extent, are these sort of interesting mixes of things that are contradictory, and some things work, some things don't, and that's probably quite accurate actually in terms of what we're getting.
You mentioned loneliness earlier. What about happiness? Is happiness just bullshit?
I think it's largely bullshit. You never hear about it anymore, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's like one of those. It was like lactose intolerance.
Yeah, it's that's another subject. All these things we're allergic to, whatever.
But they go away, and then another one comes along.
Exactly. Happiness. It doesn't make any sense to some extent. You cannot be... It's being sold like a sort of can of beans on a supermarket shelf, as though you can just do the right thing or series of things and be happy permanently. Happiness is not a permanent state. Happiness only makes sense in the context of sadness, to my mind.
Yeah.
The yin and yang on that one.
Yeah.
But the idea you can go on a sort of course and be happy is just a load of bollocks. There's something in it, and I actually preferred the word. I prefer joy and joyous to happy and happiness.
Yeah.
But that's not. I shouldn't demean it too much, because I think a lot of people out there are not happy at all ever, and it's not a bad aspiration, but it's a slightly naive, idealistic, simplistic one.
It's so vague, and it's not a panacea to depression, and it's not the answer to bipolarity and all this kind of mental illness that's out there. The idea that we would take away sadness from the world, but if we lost sadness, we wouldn't be able to be.
I think
it's asymmetry.
Oh, by the way, just in terms of those sort of three horsemen or whatever, the mental illness is. I think we're possibly on the verge of a mental illness epidemic, particularly with younger generations, due to the sort of anxiety and pressures built up in the system. That's another one to sort of add. It was a little while ago in HR circles, you heard a lot about sort of purpose and meaning. Again, it was bandied around a bit like happiness, which I'm not happy about, but there is something in purpose. You could say, they talked in New York recently, and this French woman said, Mr. Watson, what about love? When I missed the comeback on that should have been, you mean generally or between us? But careful. Love, even love, which I think, Lennon and McCartney weren't far wrong on that, but if you have purpose, love is a byproduct. I think that the key thing we need to find as a species, particularly in the light of all of these disruptive technologies, is some kind of purpose. And probably purpose has something to do with thinking of yourself less and others more. Helping other people gives you a purpose to a very large extent.
I was talking to you about this kindness idea, which I've been living off. I filled the God-shaped hole in my heart a few years ago with putting the word kindness in. And I am a bit cheeky, and I do take the piss out of people, and I sometimes offend, because one of my ex-bosses said to me, I only open my mouth to change feet. But I have been living on this thing of having kindness at the centre. Was I as kind as I could have been today? Will I be as kind as I could be tomorrow? And it's very simple, and it's very powerful, because it actually includes do unto others. It also allows you to decide, when you're being unkind. If you're saying the wrong thing to the wrong people at the wrong time or the wrong person. Yeah. You don't always get that right.
Kindness could quite literally change the world. I once on one of my maps I had cascades of rage, which means that if somebody doesn't let you into traffic or gives you the finger in the, and you then sort of pass on that rage to somebody else, and it cascades throughout the entire city, that day. And actually just letting somebody in when they're trying to get into traffic, or just giving, and a lot of it's to do with common decency. You stand on the tube, and it's just amazing how many people don't stand up for some 85-year-old. If they're on crutches, they'll probably get a seat, but if they're just straight 85, they probably won't. Again, it's back to that thing of thinking of others, and we should be thinking of others more because we're more connected to others, but actually it's doing the absolute opposite. The connectivity is putting the focus more on us and our needs, and you see people on public transport, and they've got the headphones on, they're staring at the screens, they're not even aware there's other people in the carriage. And I think if we all started being really quite kind to each other, I think you're allowed to be nasty as well. And I think if somebody crosses a line, I wouldn't be kind to them, but I think you could get a very, very long way. And it's probably ridiculously naive in the context of what's going on in the world, but...
do you think there will be a World War III coming soon to a cinema?
I'm quite slightly surprised there hasn't been one already. I mean, I grew up with the whole duck and cover under the table in primary school.
That really helped.
I think total war is a possibility. I don't think it's very probable. I'd hope we were sensible enough to avoid it. Although one of my favourite films of all time is Dr. Strangelove, and there's a couple of characters from Dr. Strangelove in Offices of Power at the moment. In fact, probably more than two. I'm more worried about things like biological terrorism, pandemics, collapse of antibiotic efficacy, all that kind of stuff. But it's a possibility.
How does one become a futurist?
Well, in my case, you just get asked to write a book about the future, and it sort of comes with the territory. There are courses where you can do future studies, horizon scanning, which is another way of calling it the same thing. Generally, you just stand up and call yourself one, and it works perfectly fine. It helps enormously to write books, and you've got to sort of say things. And the great trick, in a general sense, if you want to be a tabloid-friendly futurist, is you make all these ridiculous pronouncements, but you don't attach any detail or timing to them, and you just sort of sit back and wait, essentially. And if after sort of 10 or 20 years nothing's happened, you just kind of like do it again in a different country.
London to be covered in marmalade in 2028.
But the funny thing, I mean, I was on that when I saw you in Dublin, and I was flying back on Aer Lingus, and I had about an hour, and I was trying to, caused by what you said, which is, you must be in a great position having done this for after 14 years. And I thought, am I? What have I learnt? And I've learnt that most people are wrong about an awful lot of things given enough time. My batting average is actually not bad. Even when I'm right, probably nobody will listen. But the only thing of any significance or worth I've learned, I think, is that most of the time I'm not talking about the future. I mean, it's a bit like science fiction. Science fiction has nothing to do with the future. Science fiction is a way of voicing contemporary anxieties and concerns 95% of the time. And 95% of the time, the word future is sort of subterfuge. It's an excuse for allowing people to think quite deeply about what they're doing right now. I mean, if you sit in an office at British Telecom, you stare out the window for 2 weeks without moving, you will get either fired or some sort of warning. Whereas if you say, I'm thinking about the future, it's perfectly allowable. Yes, he's thinking about the future, leave him alone. So it's a great excuse to help people to think. And ultimately, I think that's probably what I'm for. That's what I do, is I'm there to try and facilitate some kind of deep, rigorous, sustained, reflective thinking about what people are up to and where they might be going.
And what do you think the future of futurism is?
I think it's over. I mean, I think, like a lot of things, it's cycles and it's fashion. I think it's coming to the end of a cycle. There's too many people doing it. It's becoming incredibly difficult to do because of the speed of change and volatility. People are getting a bit fed up with it on all kinds of levels. So I'm not quite sure what's next. I mean, you might get historians being back in vogue, rather amusingly, or maybe it just sort of shifts back to kind of innovation or something. I think it's a bit like innovation. I think it's an overused term. It's used quite badly in some instances. So I've got a feeling my sort of futurist prediction on futurists is that it's coming to an end of a period, although and it should probably lay low for sort of a decade or two, and then it'll probably make a magnificent comeback.
Well, we might get you to make a magnificent comeback and a pint with Seaniebee in the future to discuss what we discussed. So
Thank you very much,
Richard Watson, for being on a pint with Seaniebee. There's plenty of links to Richard, his books, etc. in the blurb. Go buy them. And I thank you for joining us. We're going to try and see if we can reincarnate the Monty Python cheese shop sketch. Goodbye, everyone. See you, Richard.